Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We are live. Beautiful people. Give me just a few moments. I'm figuring out YouTube live. If for those of you who have seen, um, I've done the Instagram live and all the other, avenues, but YouTube live is a new one for myself. So just bear with me as I get this right. Um, There is a live chat. It should be to the right of your screen. If at any point in time, um, there are any potential audio issues or technical issues or anything like that, please just let me know in that live chat, and I'll be able to do what I can to fix that. I'm excited though. I'm ready to really get to it and make it happen. So this is the Makonnen Tendaji Show. This is the official premiere. Yeah, I'm gonna get a soundboard with all the sound effects and a round of applause and all that good stuff. I'm gonna get that right pretty soon. So with the official launch of the Makonnen Tendaji Show, really this is just the opportunity for myself to be able to begin laying the groundwork for what will be a weekly um, effort to critically teach, to intentionally examine and analyze the conditions, the history, and the actions of African people. And with this effort, we intend to do so um, in a way that conveys the necessity of critically studying, along with the significance of actually engaging in the act of study, if that makes sense. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get straight to it. So again, this is the Makonnen Tendaji Show. I am Makonnen Tendaji. It is an honor to teach African people, a responsibility I do not take for granted, a responsibility to which I have dedicated my life. The Makonnen Tendaji Show aims to analyze the material realities of Black people by engaging historical and contemporary evidence, investigating ideologies and systems, and disrupting our dehumanization. We will study, analyze, examine, and discuss the history, conditions, and actions of our people the only way, the true way, the African way, together. In 30 minutes or less, it is our intention to critically teach the rich and radical history of our people, African people, our way, the African way. Today, the 3rd of January, 2021, marks the official launch of the Makonnen Tendaji Show. The overview of our show tonight is as follows, and we call these Tendaji Values. And this is something that we're going to be repeating throughout the course of our show and just our overall efforts, because it's going to be important for us to maintain a set of values, in not just our study, as well as in our organizing and our leadership efforts, all those things. So the Tendaji values are as follows. We have number one is collective accountability. When making a claim and or raising an argument, provide evidence. We must hold each other responsible for our words. We do not allow anyone outside of our race to speak down upon, dehumanize, pathologize, nor make claims without evidence about us. We must reinforce that same responsibility among us. That's collective accountability. Then the second Tendaji value is principled correction. We do not disrespect, cancel, or slander any of our people for potentially being misinformed or incorrect. We correct each other to ensure we are all being as thorough and as rigorous as possible in the study and the discussion of our people. Correction is done out of love and out of respect. This is not an intellectual competition. And the third and final Tendaji value we have is intellectual muscle. Our enemies are not ignorant. They do not need to know us. They know us very well. As a result of scrutinous study of us, sharpening our collective critical consciousness then to face our enemies with fortitude is what it means to build intellectual muscle. So those are the three Tendaji values: collective accountability, principled correction, and intellectual muscle. Again, it is important for us to maintain a strict set of values and hold the line on them. So in the times of conflict, in the heat of battle, we have a base upon which we draw strength. So we are going to get into the main topic of discussion of our launch, of our premiere of our show this evening. And before we can even begin to analyze or examine any portion of our history or talk about any contemporary events, it's important for us that not only do we have an understanding of our values, but we also begin to critically think about what it means to be a scholar of African people, what it means to study the conditions and the realities and the experiences of African people. It is not enough for us to walk around in certain spaces, virtual or otherwise, and believe simply because we possess a particular identity, we can speak on that group writ large, that we believe that we are experts, we are well-read in the conditions, in the experiences of our people. We're going to need to do some real in-depth study, some real rigorous work to arrive at a position to where we can speak on the conditions, on the history, and on the experiences of African people. I'm sure none of us would trust the doctor who just received their credentials to be a medical doctor, and this is their first day out of medical school. We would not trust that doctor as much as we would trust the doctor who has been a practitioner for 10, 20, 30 years. We know what it means to get what we need from the right places when it comes to our physical health, when it comes to our education. Go to the best schools, we obtain the best jobs and the best positions. We need to be sure we are retaining that same mentality when it comes to how we study our people, how we think about our people, how we talk about our people, how we engage with our people in these social justice organizing spaces, and in just everyday regular experiences and spaces among our people. It can no longer be enough for us to just simply take heed in the fact that I am Black, therefore I can speak on Black people. That could not be further from the truth, and it's actually a dangerous position that too many of our people fall under the parameters of. So again, it's important for us to be scholars among our people. And so with being a scholar, with this notion that it's paramount for us to critically and seriously study our people and ourselves, we have to draw strength from some ideas of what it means to be a critical thinker. I call them a scholar's fundamentals. A scholar's fundamentals are the things that we can learn about within ourselves, within our own minds, and also learn about among our peers, among our enemies, among all those in society in terms of how our brain really works, what makes us tick, what makes us problematize a particular issue, what makes us gravitate towards a particular ideology. So a scholar's fundamentals are those concepts, those notions that really describe not just what we think, but how, and how we develop these thoughts and how we arrive at certain conclusions and at certain ways of thinking. So one of these fundamentals of a scholar is what we call cognitive dissonance. And this comes from Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory, which suggests that we have an inner drive to hold all our attitudes and behavior in harmony and avoid disharmony or dissonance. This is known as the principle of cognitive consistency. This is a term that I'm sure most of us have heard, whether it's in-person contexts or in virtual digital contexts on social media discourse, and among other places. And it's important, again, that we have critical definition of this. So what cognitive dissonance is defined as is the state of discomfort felt when two or more modes of thought contradict each other. When we learn new information that challenges a deeply held belief, we may feel motivated to somehow resolve this negative feeling that results to restore cognitive consonance. The response to this dissonance, uh, to this friction, this tension, this conflict in our minds, right? Some of the responses we may have to this include ignoring the source of information, projecting anger onto that particular source, or just projecting anger out into the world because our cognitive consonance has been disrupted. So now we're in a state of panic, in that state of fight or flight. Here are my particular beliefs, and here's something that comes along and throws that into disarray. It contradicts that. So now I'm going to resort to a particular mode of thinking that may not be as logical as I would like it to be. That may not be as coherent as it would be if I were in my state of cognitive consonance. For example, let's say I have a particular position that it is safer to drive a car with no seatbelt. That's my position. That's what I believe. That's what I practice. That's what I reinforce. So I've been driving, let's say, for 5 years with no seatbelt now. I've never had an accident. I've never had any issues with the law in terms of being pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt. So I have a particular vault of experience that supports my position that it's safer to drive with no seatbelt. I have this internal narrative, this cognitive consonance about me that believes it's safer to drive without a seatbelt. Now, let's say somebody from the DMV, right? The Department of Motor Vehicles. Let's say I meet someone from the DMV and they actually provide a national study on the effects of driving with no seatbelt and with a seatbelt. And let's say, of course, this is a hypothetical example, right? This person brings this study, and the data in this national study demonstrate that it's actually unsafe to drive with no seatbelt on. Now, what happens next is critical. In my mind, again, I have this internal narrative, this cognitive consonance about me that believes and is comfortable in believing it is safer driving with no seatbelt. But wait, now this new evidence comes, in front of me that directly contradicts my position, that directly opposes my thought, my position. So now I'm thrown into a state of cognitive dissonance. My mental harmony is disrupted. I've been thrown into a state of mental disharmony, into a state of cognitive dissonance. To now I'm really having to sit with this new information and juxtapose it with my position and go, wait a minute, if this is how I've been driving for 5 years, but this new evidence contradicts that, what's been happening? Have I been living a lie? Have I been, it becomes very cloudy in terms of what is logical and what it is that we believe to be true. That's a critical distinction that we really need to make. So this idea of cognitive dissonance is one that we need to be not just knowledgeable of, but aware of to the point that we can identify it in ourselves and in our peers, in our organizations. Because what will happen is there will come a time where, let's say, you are teaching on a particular subject. The material that you're teaching may throw off the cognitive consonance of some of the people who are listening to you teach, which then will lead them to entering this state of cognitive dissonance. They may ignore your research. They may reject your evidence. They may project anger onto you for contradicting their positions. It's going to be up to you, the scholar, to know how to deal with cognitive dissonance, not in a destructive way to where you say, oh, anyone who doesn't believe the evidence or anyone who doesn't understand what I'm teaching, they are dumb, they are ignorant. That's a destructive approach. And always, 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 we need to be sure we are adopting a constructive approach in teaching African people, in teaching African history and conditions of African people. So cognitive dissonance is one critical example of a scholar's fundamentals, because it's far too vulnerable of a process, the process of teaching, the process of learning. It's a very fragile and vulnerable process that will disrupt the cognitive consonance of many of our people. So as scholars, as teachers, as organizers, we need to be sure we are ready to not just, again, uh, uh, um, obscure or ignore those of our people who have been living a certain way, believing a particular set of beliefs, and reject the evidence, reject the logical conclusions that you have reached, because they need to preserve that internal narrative. We need to be sure we are adopting that constructive approach and not simply reinforcing a destructive approach that simply labels those of our people who disagree as ignorant, as lost causes, so to speak. So that's one of our scholars' fundamentals. Another one is also critical, and that's confirmation bias. And now this is a very, very important one, especially when it comes to those of us who may be students and have made the decision to devote their education to, whether it's Black studies, Africana studies, Black women studies, Black male studies, whatever the discipline is. Confirmation bias is an example of a logical fallacy that we really need to be sure we are maintaining a constant mindfulness of. And what it's defined as, this is what happens when we have formed a certain view. After forming this particular view, we only embrace the information that confirms that view, while ignoring all of the other information, while ignoring all of the other facts. So back to the example of the seatbelt. If I've been driving for no seatbelt, or driving with no seatbelt for 5 years, right, and I will defend my position with information, I'm only going to look for the information that confirms my position, that confirms what it is that I'm supportive of, while ignoring any of the other information on car accidents, on endangerment of people in a vehicle when they don't wear a seatbelt. This is what happens when we engage in this confirmation bias. What happens is we actually do ourselves a disservice, because we ultimately put on these blinders, and so we go, okay, I will look for information only within my my view. There is no periphery. There is no possibility of information that contradicts my position, that information that does not confirm my position simply does not exist. This is the confirmation bias fallacy. And so what happens is, this error leads us to actually stop gathering information once we have gathered the information that confirms our position, which could potentially lead us to ignoring some very, very critical information about that particular subject. What happens is we pick out those bits of data and those percentages and those quotables from articles, right, that again confirm our position, our views, and we end up affirming our position, even though that may potentially be an illogical or an incorrect position. So what happens is, or not what happens, the way that confirmation bias kind of formulates is human decision making and information processing is often biased because people are limited to interpreting information from their own viewpoint. We need to process information quickly in order to protect ourselves from harm. Remember, back to the cognitive dissonance. When we're presented with information that contradicts our position, we enter this state of discomfort, of disorder, of chaos. We don't know what to believe. So we ignore the source. We project anger in order to preserve ourselves, in order to preserve our positions. This also contributes to us engaging in confirmation bias. We like to feel good about ourselves. And a part of how we feel good about ourselves is believing we are intelligent. So if we have positions and arguments that have propelled us to a particular position of intelligence, we are not going to accept any information, any evidence that may take us down a couple of notches in terms of our positions maybe being flawed or maybe being a bit too narrow in focus and maybe even illogical to a certain degree. So confirmation bias is a way that we hold on to our positions. We hold on to that position of intelligence. We hold on to that position of being one who is knowledgeable. And so what happens is confirmation bias, ultimately we can conceptualize it as a way of a method of ego preservation. And how we can counter confirmation bias is by detaching ego from knowledge, detaching personal character and capability from the process of building a critical consciousness. Being a student, being a learner is inherently vulnerable, is inherently ego-less. You cannot have a big, strong ego and also be an excellent student, an excellent learner. On the flip side, one cannot call themselves an effective teacher if they have this big ego that they rest upon. This is something that we need to understand. Again, not just with confirmation bias, but as we develop our minds, right, individually and collectively as African scholars, it's going to be important for us to divorce ego from knowledge, to divorce ego from critical consciousness raising. So that's number two. So we have a scholar's fundamentals. Number one is cognitive dissonance. The second one is confirmation bias. The third one that we will talk about today is what we can think of as anonymous authority. This is one of my favorite ones to learn about, to read about, and to teach about, because it's one that is quite prevalent, particularly with this discourse on social media. So let's use Twitter, for example. When anonymous authority comes into play, to give an example is, let's say, let's stick to the example of the seatbelt wearing. Let's say I hop on Twitter and I say, studies show it's actually safer to not wear a seatbelt when you drive, and I tweet that. Somebody comments on that tweet, they say, oh, that's an interesting position. What studies are you talking about that demonstrate it's safer to not wear a seatbelt? And my response to this person is, oh, studies. Or my response is, Google it. I've just engaged in the anonymous authority logical fallacy. This is what happens when an unspecified source is used as evidence for a particular claim. Phrases such as, they say, it has been said, I once heard, studies show, without then naming the studies. When we fail to specify a source of the authority, we cannot verify the source, thus we cannot verify the credibility of the argument. Appeals to anonymous sources are more often than not a way to fabricate, exaggerate, or even misrepresent facts in order to deceive others into accepting a particular claim. We have to be very, very wary of they. They said this. They know this, right? When the authority in question is not named, it's impossible for anybody to confirm the validity, the credibility of this claim, of that argument. So as African scholars, it's going to be critical for us when we have a specific position that we want to assert or a problem we want to raise. It's critical for us when we do so, we have authorities that we can identify to the claims that we are propagating, to the authority, to the ideas that we are asserting. So, for example, back to the seatbelt example. If I were to say, studies show, to not wear a seatbelt while driving, and then I would list the sources. U.S. Bureau of Justice, the CDC, Again, hypothetical example, right? But the point is, I need to be able to provide identification to the authority of the sources that I'm citing to fuel my argument. So, to review, the three fundamentals of a scholar, the three scholars' fundamentals are cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, and anonymous authority. And these are just three examples of fundamentals that we as scholars and students need to be sure we are maintaining a critical understanding of, right? Not just as we read and as we, critically study our people, but even more, especially when we are in conversation, in community with other Africans. No longer can we tolerate anonymous authority being used in a community conversation on a particular condition that affects African people. No longer can we tolerate any of our people, starting with ourselves, to ignore evidence or project anger towards a particular argument that contradicts our belief. It's up to us, again, to embody the Tendaji values: collective accountability, principled correction, and intellectual muscle, because this is not about any type of, mental Olympics or intellectual Hunger Games, to where we're just seeing who can read the most books and who can, quote the most ancestors, and whoever does so the best is the winner. that is, it could not be further from what our objective needs to be as those of us who have a particular access, right, to information, to resources, and occupy a certain position in society, whether as university students or of a middle class status or even higher than that. It's up to us to take that information, that critical knowledge, know how to teach it properly and effectively, and do so with humility, do so with passion, do so with patience for the masses of African people. So, for our launch of the Makonnen Tendaji Show, we definitely wanted to just lay some groundwork and establish a proper foundation upon which we will build further content. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. The Makonnen Tendaji Show is weekly, Sundays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. That's 8 p.m. Central time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And every week we will be discussing a new topic, current events. We'll have guests soon. And again, the Makonnen Tendaji Show is tasked with teaching African people, analyzing the material realities of African people, investigating the ideologies and the systems that oppress African people, and disrupting the dehumanization of African people. And we do this the African way, the true way, together. None of us can pursue our education or opportunities and then choose to, descend like knowledge gods upon the masses of people and just sprinkle a little knowledge on the people and then ascend back up to our positions of privilege and we're not privileged, our positions of opportunity and comfort. The African way is the only way. So with that being said, my name is Makonnen Tendaji, and always, as always, it is an honor, a privilege, and a serious responsibility to teach African people. We will be back with episode 2 of the Makonnen Tendaji Show next Sunday at 6 o'clock. So again, please like, subscribe to the channel. And again, this is our contribution to our global struggle. Africa will be free.